The sun hadn't fully risen yet over the quiet stretch of farmland in rural Georgia, but he was already moving. Bare feet on dew-damp earth, hands brushing over rows of young collard greens, checking for pests, for signs of thirst, for anything out of place. He didn't need an alarm clock. His body woke with the light same as it had for the last 20 years. Before that, it had woken to the blare of ship horns or the crackle of radio static in places most folks only saw on the news. But that life felt like another man's memory now, faded at the edges but still sharp where it counted. He lived alone on 40 acres that rolled gently toward a slow-moving creek. The house was modest, wood siding weathered to a soft gray, a wraparound porch with 2 rocking chairs, one for him, one for company that rarely came, and a barn that leaned just slightly to the left, like it was tired but still standing. Chickens clucked near the garden fence. A pair of goats watched him from the far pasture, ears twitching. Everything had its rhythm, its place. That's what he loved about farming. It didn't care about your past. It only asked, did you show up? Did you do the work? Most folks in the county knew him as the quiet black man who grew the sweetest okra and always waved from his tractor. They didn't know about the tattoos hidden under his long-sleeve shirts, faded ink that marked years of service, loss, and loyalty. They didn't know he could strip and reassemble a rifle blindfolded, or that he still ran 3 miles every morning before breakfast, not for show, but because stillness made his mind restless. He'd been a Navy SEAL, served 3 tours, earned medals he kept in a shoebox in the back of his closet, never displayed. He didn't talk about it, not because he was ashamed, but because that chapter was closed. He'd traded sand and salt water for soil and silence, and he liked it that way. The land had been in his family since his grandfather bought it in 1923, 40 acres and a mule, they used to say. His grandfather had been a sharecropper's son who saved every penny, worked double shifts at the sawmill, and walked 10 miles to the county courthouse to sign the deed himself, just to prove he could. He'd told his grandson, "Land ain't just dirt, boy. It's your name in the ground. It's your right to stand." Those words stuck. When the military offered him a desk job in Virginia after his last deployment, he turned it down. Came back here instead, fixed up the old farmhouse, cleared the overgrown fields, planted seeds like prayers. Now, at 58, his hair was more salt than pepper. His hands rough from work, but his eyes dark, steady, always scanning, still held that quiet intensity. He noticed things. The way birds went silent before a storm, the slight shift in tire tracks on his dirt road, the unfamiliar pickup that had been circling the edge of his property for the past week. It was an old red truck, rust along the wheel wells, Confederate flag sticker half peeled on the rear window. He'd seen it twice near the county line, once parked near the abandoned church down the road. The driver never got out, just sat there engine idling, watching. At first he figured it was kids messing around, but the third time he walked out to the road with his binoculars, old habit, and saw 2 men inside, one pointing toward his house, the other taking notes in a small book. They weren't surveyors. They weren't lost. They were looking at him. He didn't call the sheriff right away. In these parts, calling law enforcement over a feeling didn't always go well, especially for a black man. So he watched back. He checked his perimeter every evening. Fences secure, gates locked, motion lights working. He made sure his shotgun was clean and loaded, though he hoped he'd never need it. He also started sleeping with his old Ka-Bar knife under his pillow again, not out of fear but respect. He'd learned long ago that danger rarely announces itself with a shout. It whispers first. Life on the farm went on. He harvested early tomatoes, canned green beans, repaired a leak in the irrigation line. He traded eggs with Mrs. Langley from down the road for her peach preserves. They sat on her porch one afternoon, sipping sweet tea, talking about the dry spell and how the corn wasn't tasseling right. She mentioned offhand that some new folks had been asking questions at the general store, said they were looking into old property records and claimed some black families were sitting on land that wasn't rightfully theirs. She'd laughed it off. Sounded like nonsense to me, she said, shaking her head. But they were real serious about it. He didn't say much. Just nodded, sipped his tea, and filed the information away. Later that night, he pulled out his grandfather's deed, yellowed paper, careful cursive, stamped and signed by a white county clerk who probably never thought a black man would own land in his lifetime. He traced the lines with his finger. Johnson Tract, Section 14, purchased in full. It was real. It was his. but now someone was calling it stolen. The next morning he found his mailbox knocked over. Not just tipped, smashed. Letters scattered in the mud, one stamped with a crude symbol, a circle with a cross inside like a twisted sun. He recognized it from his intel days. White supremacist groups used variations of it. His jaw tightened, but his hands stayed calm as he gathered the mail. He took pictures with his phone, then reset the post himself. No drama, no shouting, just facts documented. A few days later, his tractor tires were slashed. 3 of them, deep cuts, deliberate. He stood there in the barn, hands on his hips, breathing slow. Anger was a luxury he couldn't afford, not yet. He patched the tires, temporary fix, and ordered new ones. While waiting, he hitched the plow to his old mule, Bessie, and finished turning the south field the old way. Neighbors driving by slowed down, curious. He just tipped his hat and kept working. He started noticing more activity. Flyers left on fence posts with phrases like, "Reclaim our heritage and European roots," "American soil." Online, he found a local message board where someone calling themselves True Son 796 posted rants about land reparations going the wrong way and certain groups benefiting from stolen white legacy. They mentioned a farm near Mill Creek, his farm by description if not by name. Said the owner claimed ancestry he didn't deserve and was hoarding European-descended property. It made no sense. His family had no European ties he knew of. And even if they did, what did that have to do with a deed signed in 1923? But logic didn't matter to people like this. They built stories out of shadows and called it truth. Still, he didn't react. Not outwardly. Inside, though, the old instinct stirred. The part of him that had moved through midnight waters, that had cleared rooms with nothing but breath and focus. That part was awake now. He began walking the property line at dusk, not with a weapon, but with awareness. He noted blind spots, escape routes, places where someone could hide. He reinforced the locks on his shed. He made sure his solar-powered security cameras were angled just right. One evening, as he sat on the porch shelling peas, he heard a vehicle slow on the road. He didn't look up right away, just kept working, fingers moving steadily. The engine idled for a long moment, then drove off. He waited until it was gone, then stood, stretched, and walked to the edge of his yard. In the gravel, fresh tire tracks. Different from the red truck, wider, newer. He went inside, poured himself a glass of water, and sat at his kitchen table. On the wall hung a single framed photo, him in uniform, younger, standing beside a group of fellow SEALs in front of a ship. All of them smiling, arms around each other, unaware of the losses ahead. He looked at their faces, then at his own reflection in the glass. He wasn't that man anymore, but he hadn't lost what made him. He'd fought for this country in places where the ground burned and the air smelled like smoke. He'd bled for strangers he'd never meet. And now back home on land his grandfather had earned with calloused hands and quiet courage, someone thought they could walk in and take it because of a lie they'd wrapped in history. He shook his head, not in anger, but in quiet resolve. Let them come, he'd be ready, not as a soldier, not as a weapon, but as a man who knew the value of peace and the cost of defending it. The next morning, before sunrise, he laced up his boots, filled his canteen, and walked the full perimeter of his land. He touched the old oak at the north corner, the one his grandfather had planted as a sapling. He knelt by the creek and let the cool water run over his hands. He breathed in the smell of earth, of growing things, of home. This wasn't just dirt, it was his name in the ground, and nobody, not a gang, not a liar with a loud voice, not fear itself, was going to erase it. The trouble didn't come all at once. It crept in like morning fog, thin at first, easy to ignore, but thickening until it blurred everything. After the slashed tires and the smashed mailbox, things got quieter for a few days. Too quiet. He kept working the fields, feeding the animals, checking his cameras every night, but he could feel it. The shift in the air, like before a summer storm. Then the rumors started. It began at the feed store. He went in for chicken feed and heard 2 men near the coffee machine talking in low voices. One said, "Heard some folks are looking into old land records around here. Say some of it was never supposed to go to, well, you know." The other nodded, eyes flicking toward him before looking away fast. He paid for his feed, said morning like always, and left. But the words stuck with him. A few days later, a neighbor he'd known for 15 years, same man who'd borrowed his truck to haul firewood last winter, walked past his gate without waving, just stared straight ahead, jaw tight. That stung more than the slashed tires. It wasn't anger. It was doubt. Someone had planted a seed in their heads and now they weren't sure what to believe. He didn't confront anyone. Not yet. Instead, he started listening. At the post office, at the gas station, even in the church parking lot after Sunday service, he went more for the quiet than the sermon these days. He heard whispers. Phrases like stolen property, European heritage, and historical correction floated around like bad pollen. Most folks didn't say it to his face. But they'd stop talking when he walked by, or change the subject too quickly. Then came the flyers. Not just on fence posts now, but tucked under windshield wipers, slipped into mailboxes, even taped to the door of the local diner. They were printed on cheap paper, blurry photos of old maps with red circles around sections of land, including his. At the top, bold letters read, "Reclaim what is rightfully ours." Below, smaller text claimed that after the Civil War, certain groups had illegally seized land belonging to white European descendants through fraudulent deeds and government corruption. It named no one directly, but it described his farm, its location, the creek, the old oak tree, clear as day. He took one flyer down, folded it carefully, and put it in his pocket. That night he sat at his kitchen table with his laptop, something he rarely used for more than weather reports and seed orders. He typed in a few phrases from the flyer. Up popped a website, plain black background, white text, no contact info. It called itself the Heritage Guard. There were posts about blood and soil, ancestral rights, and restoring order. One thread was titled, "The Johnson Tract, a Case of Stolen Legacy." It claimed his grandfather had tricked a white landowner into selling him the property during a time of racial upheaval, and that the deed was legally void. He read it twice, then laughed, a dry, quiet sound with no joy in it. His grandfather hadn't tricked anyone. He'd worked 12-hour days for 20 years, saved every dime, and walked into the courthouse with cash in hand while half the town watched, waiting for him to fail. The white man who sold him the land. He'd been desperate, drowning in debt after his cotton crop failed. He'd wanted to sell, and the deed was recorded, witnessed, and filed. He'd seen it himself. But facts didn't matter to people who'd already made up their minds. What worried him more was how organized they sounded. This wasn't just a couple of angry guys shouting on the internet. They had a name, a message, a target. A few nights later, he woke to the sound of engines. Not one truck, two. He sat up slow, listening. They idled near the end of his driveway, headlights off. He moved to the window, staying in the shadows. Through the trees, he saw the red pickup from before and a newer black SUV. Doors opened. Voices carried on the wind, low but clear enough. "He's just a farmer," one said, voice young, cocky. "Don't matter." Another replied, deeper, colder. "Land belongs to blood, not squatters. We going in? Not tonight. Just let him know we're watching." Then the engine started again, and they drove off. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, he found fresh footprints near his back fence, boots size large circling the chicken coop. Nothing taken, nothing broken, just presence, a message, "We can get close." He called the sheriff's office. A deputy came out, an older man with tired eyes and a slow walk. He looked at the footprints, nodded, took notes. "We'll keep an eye on things," he said. "But unless they trespass or threaten you directly, there's not much we can do." "What about the flyers?" "The website?" "Free speech," the deputy sighed. "Hate's ugly, but it's legal, till it turns violent." He didn't argue. He knew the drill. You couldn't arrest someone for thinking wrong, only for doing wrong. But he also knew how this played out. Words turned to actions, actions turned to violence. And when it came, it wouldn't be fair. It wouldn't be clean, so he prepared, not with anger. With calm, he checked his shotgun, clean, oiled, shells loaded. He made sure his phone was charged and had signal in every corner of the house. He cleared brush along the property line so no one could hide. He moved his tools inside the barn at night. And he started sleeping with the lights off, listening. The harassment got bolder. One afternoon, while he was fixing a fence post, a car slowed on the road. A young man leaned out the window, shouted, "Hey!" "That land ain't yours," before speeding off. He didn't react, just kept hammering. Another time, someone spray-painted "thief" on his barn door in shaky red letters. He washed it off with a hose and a stiff brush, then painted over it the next day. No fuss, but inside something hardened. What hurt most wasn't the threats. It was the silence from people he thought were friends. The neighbor who used to bring him fresh corn now crossed the street when they saw him coming. The woman at the post office stopped making eye contact. It was like he'd become a ghost in his own town, seen but not acknowledged. Not trusted, he understood why. Fear was contagious, and these Heritage Guard people were good at spreading it. They twisted history into a weapon, made lies sound like truth, and painted anyone who questioned them as anti-white or anti-history. It was old hate wearing new clothes, but he refused to be scared into leaving. This land was his peace, his promise to his grandfather. His second chance after years of chaos overseas. He'd seen enough war. He wasn't running from bullies in his own backyard. Still, he stayed alert. He noticed patterns. The red truck usually came on Tuesdays and Fridays. The black SUV on weekends. They never stayed long, just enough to rattle him. Once, they left a dead crow on his porch. Another time, a crude wooden sign that read European property, do not trespass. He took pictures of everything, saved screenshots of the website, built a file just in case. One evening, as he sat on the porch shelling peas, his phone buzzed. It was a local news alert. White supremacist group active in county. Authorities monitoring. The article mentioned the Heritage Guard by name. Said they'd been linked to similar incidents in 2 other states. It quoted the sheriff. We're aware of the group and are taking all threats seriously. But it also said no arrests had been made. He read it twice, then set the phone down. Good. At least someone was paying attention. But he knew the truth. The law would only move after something bad happened. And he wasn't going to wait for that. So he did what he'd always done, worked. Planted more beans. Fixed the goat pen. Watered the tomatoes. Let his routine be his armor. Then came the worst night. It was past midnight. He was reading by lamplight when he heard it. Glass breaking, not far. From the barn. He was on his feet in seconds, silent, moving like he used to in the dark alleys of foreign cities. He grabbed his shotgun, not to use but to have. Peered out the back window, 3 figures near the barn door. One held a crowbar. Another was kicking over his seed trays. The third stood guard, scanning the house. His heart didn't race. It steadied. He stepped onto the porch, shotgun held low but visible. You're on private property, he called, voice calm, clear. Leave now, they froze, one turned. Or what, old man? Or I call the sheriff. And you spend the night in jail. The one with the crowbar laughed. You think we're scared of cops? This land's ours by blood. You stole it. I've got the deed. Signed in 1923, you want to see it? We don't care about your fake papers, the third one spat. This is about heritage. About race, he didn't argue. Didn't raise his voice. Just stood there solid as the oak tree behind him. Last chance, he said. Walk away, they hesitated. Looked at each other. Then, grumbling, they backed off, climbed into the black SUV and peeled out. He didn't go back inside right away. He walked to the barn, surveyed the damage, broken jars of saved seeds, overturned tools, mud tracked everywhere. It wasn't about the mess. It was the message. We can hurt what you love. But as he stood there in the moonlight, breathing slow, he felt something else too. Not fear, not rage, clarity. They thought he was just a farmer, an easy target, a quiet black man living alone, minding his business. They didn't know the man beneath the overalls. They didn't know about the years of training, the discipline, the quiet strength that came from surviving hell and choosing peace anyway. They saw weakness. He knew better. And if they came back, not as vandals, but as invaders, he'd show them the difference. For now, he cleaned up the barn, swept the glass, gathered what seeds he could save. Then he went inside, locked the doors, and slept with one ear open. The next morning, he called the sheriff again. This time, he played the audio he'd recorded from his porch camera. The voices were clear. The threats were real. The deputy came faster this time. Took more notes. Said they'd increase patrols. But as the truck drove away, he knew the truth. The real protection would have to come from him. And that was okay. He'd protected his country. Now he'd protect his home. Not with hate, not with violence unless forced, but with the quiet, unshakable truth that this land, his land, was earned, not stolen. And no lie, no gang, No twisted version of history would take it from him. He watered his garden that afternoon like nothing had happened. The tomatoes needed it. The okra was starting to flower. Life went on, but so did he. Ready, watching, rooted, like the land itself. The heat that August evening was thick, sticky like syrup, the kind that made your shirt cling to your back. Before you'd even walked 10 steps, crickets had started their nightly song and fireflies blinked lazily over the bean rows. He sat on the porch, shirt sleeves rolled up, mending a torn feed sack with slow, even stitches. His mind was quiet, the way it only got after a long day of honest work. For a few hours, it almost felt like the past weeks hadn't happened. The whispers, the footprints, the broken glass in the barn. Almost. Then he heard it. Not an engine, not shouting, just a low hum of tires on gravel, too slow for someone passing through. He didn't look up right away, kept stitching, but his ears tuned in, sharp as they'd been in places where silence meant survival. One vehicle. Then another. Then a third. They stopped at the end of his driveway. He set the sack down, wiped his hands on his jeans, and stood. Walked to the edge of the porch, hands loose at his sides. No rush, no panic. Just presence. Headlights stayed off, but moonlight caught the shapes. The red pickup, the black SUV, and now a white van with tinted windows. Doors opened. 5 men stepped out, all in dark clothes. One carried a rifle slung over his shoulder. Another had a baseball bat. The tallest, the one who walked like he owned the ground, carried nothing but a rolled-up paper in his hand. That was the leader. He'd seen his face before, in a blurry screenshot from the Heritage Guard website. Sharp features, cold eyes, the kind of man who thought history was a costume he could wear. They walked up the drive together, boots crunching on gravel, voices low but growing louder as they neared. "This is it," the leader said. "The Johnson tract, stolen from white settlers after the war. We're taking it back." One of the younger ones kicked over a row of potted marigolds near the steps. "Place looks like a junkyard," he sneered. The leader stopped at the bottom of the porch stairs, looked up and saw him standing there. "Well," he said, voice smooth but edged with contempt. "Look who's home." He didn't answer right away, just looked at them, really looked. Saw the tension in their shoulders, the way their eyes darted, the bravado masking something shaky underneath. They weren't soldiers. They weren't even disciplined. Just angry men wrapped in a story they'd convinced themselves was true. "You're trespassing," he said finally, voice calm, level. "This is private property." The leader unrolled the paper, a copy of some old map, smudged and marked with red ink. "This land was granted to European descendants in 1820. Your family had no right to it. You're squatting on stolen heritage." "That's not how it happened," he replied. "My grandfather bought this land fair and square in 1923. Paid cash. Got a deed. It's recorded at the courthouse. Those records were corrupted," the man snapped. "Part of the system that stripped white families of their birthright. We're correcting history." He almost laughed. Not out of mockery, but disbelief. "You think tearing up my garden fixes history? We're giving you 24 hours to pack up and leave," the leader said, stepping closer. "Or we'll make you leave." One of the others raised the bat. "Yeah, and take your stolen seeds with you." He didn't flinch. Didn't raise his voice. Just stood there, grounded like the old oak behind the house. "I'm not going anywhere. This land belongs to my family. It always has." The leader's face twisted. "You don't get it, do you? You're not supposed to own land like this. It's unnatural." Against the order of things, that word, unnatural, hit like a stone. He'd heard it before, in different forms, in different lifetimes. On patrol in foreign cities, in barracks, even in grocery store lines. The idea that a black man owning something valuable, peace, property, pride, was somehow wrong. Out of place. But he wasn't that young man anymore, trying to prove he belonged. He was older now, wiser, and tired of explaining his right to exist. "Get off my land," he said, firm but quiet. Now the leader's eyes narrowed. He turned to the man with the bat. "Grab him. We'll show him what happens when you steal from your betters." The kid with the bat lunged up the steps, swinging the bat low. Not to kill, but to knock him down, to humiliate. That was their plan, intimidation, show of force. Make him run. But he didn't run. The moment the kid's foot hit the top step, he moved. Not fast like a sprint, but precise, like water finding its path. He sidestepped the swing, caught the bat midair with one hand and twisted. The kid yelped, losing his grip. In one smooth motion, he yanked the bat free, spun it, and pressed the thick end against the kid's throat, not hard. Just enough to pin him against the porch post. The whole thing took less than 3 seconds. Silence fell. The other 4 froze, stunned. "What the?" The leader stammered. He didn't speak. Just held the kid steady, eyes locked on the group. "Drop your weapons," he said. "Now." The man with the rifle hesitated, then slowly lowered it to the ground. The others followed, knife, bat, even the rolled-up map. He kept his voice low, steady. "Hands where I can see them." They raised their hands, eyes wide now, not with hate but with fear, real fear. The kind that comes when you realize the person you thought was weak is anything but. He let the kid go. The boy stumbled back, rubbing his neck, face pale. Then he stepped forward just 1 step onto the top stair. Not threatening, just present. "I served 22 years in the U.S. Navy," he said. 8 of those as a SEAL. I've been in firefights, hostage rescues, missions where one wrong move meant death. I've bled for this country so people like you could say what you want, believe what you want, even if it's wrong. He paused, let that sink in. But this? He gestured to the trampled marigolds, the broken fence post from last week. The fear in their eyes now. This isn't patriotism. This isn't heritage. This is cowardice. Hiding behind a flag and a lie to steal from someone who's done nothing but work. The leader tried to speak, but his voice cracked. We didn't know." "Of course you didn't," he said. "You never bother to know. You just see a black man on land you think should be yours, and you make up a story to justify taking it." He looked at each of them, not with anger, but with something heavier. Disappointment. "You came here thinking you'd scare an old farmer, but you walked onto ground protected by more than fences. You walked onto ground earned by generations of men who worked harder than you'll ever know, and you insulted their memory." The kid who'd swung the bat looked down, shame flickering across his face. He took a breath. "Now you're going to leave. Walk to your vehicles. Drive away. And if I ever see you on this road again, talking, watching, leaving trash, I won't be this polite." He held their gaze until they turned one by one and walked back down the drive. The leader was last. He stopped, looked back once, mouth open like he wanted to say something. But no words came. He just got in the van and drove off. The whole confrontation lasted less than 10 minutes. After they were gone, the night felt different. Quieter but not peaceful, charged like after lightning strikes. He stood on the porch a long time, listening to his own breath, feeling the old rhythm return. Not the rush of combat, but the calm after. He picked up the bat they'd dropped, carried it inside, and set it by the door. Not as a weapon, as a reminder. Then he went back out, knelt by the marigolds, and gently righted the pots. Patted the soil back around the roots. They'd live. Plants were tough that way. A few minutes later, headlights swept the yard. Not the gang's vehicles, but a county sheriff's cruiser. The deputy from before stepped out, hand on his belt but not drawing. "Heard there was trouble," the deputy said, voice cautious. "Just some trespassers," he replied. They left. The deputy looked at the tire tracks, the disturbed gravel, the upright marigolds. "You okay?" "I'm fine. You sure?" They had weapons. I handled it. The deputy studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I saw the footage from your camera last week." The voices. The threats, he paused. "You didn't have to do this alone." "I didn't," he said. "My grandfather's been with me the whole time." The deputy didn't ask what he meant. Maybe he understood. Maybe he just knew some things didn't need explaining. He filed a report that night, gave descriptions, license plate numbers if he could recall them, played the porch camera audio. The deputy took it all seriously this time. Said they'd track the vehicles, pull records, look into the Heritage Guard as a domestic threat. But even as the cruiser drove away, he knew the real victory wasn't in the report or the police response. It was in the silence that followed. No more red trucks circling. No more flyers. No more whispers at the store, at least not the same kind. Word spread fast in small towns. And the story that went around now wasn't about stolen land. It was about the quiet farmer who stood his ground without firing a shot, who disarmed 5 men with nothing but presence and truth. A few days later, Mrs. Langley from down the road stopped by with a pie. "Heard what happened," she said, handing it over. "You did right," she didn't say more. Didn't need to. At the feed store, the man who'd avoided him for weeks nodded as he passed. A real nod. Respectful. Even the post office clerk smiled when he came in. It wasn't forgiveness. It was clarity. People saw now who the real threat was, not the man tending his garden, but the ones shouting lies from the shadows. He kept working the land. Harvested the first batch of okra. Fixed the goat pen. Watched the sunset from the porch like always. But something had shifted. Not in the world, but in him. He'd spent years trying to leave the warrior behind, to be just a farmer, just a man at peace. But peace wasn't passive. Sometimes it had to be defended, and defending it didn't mean becoming what you fought against. It meant standing firm, clear-eyed, and kind, even when faced with hate. That night he sat on the porch again, this time with a cup of coffee. The stars were bright. The crickets sang. And for the first time in weeks he felt it, the deep, quiet hum of safety, not because the danger was gone, but because he knew, without doubt, that he could meet it, and still come home to his garden. The morning after the confrontation, the county sheriff's office moved faster than anyone expected. By noon, they'd identified 2 of the vehicles from his security footage, matched them to registration records, traced them back to a rented storage unit on the edge of town. Inside, they found more flyers, printed maps with angry red markings, and a stack of handwritten notes filled with rants about bloodlines, land reclamation, and cleansing the soil. One page listed several black-owned farms in the region. His circled 3 times. It wasn't just talk anymore. It was planning. News spread quickly, not just through gossip, but through the local paper, then a regional TV station, and soon, online. A short clip from his porch camera went viral. Grainy black and white footage of 5 men approaching, then backing away in stunned silence after less than a minute. No violence, no shouting. Just one man standing his ground, calm and unshaken, while the aggressors unraveled. People called it the quiet takedown. Veterans groups shared it. Civil rights organizations quoted it. Even a retired general posted, "This is what real strength looks like." But he didn't watch any of it. He wasn't on social media, didn't own a smart TV. When reporters showed up at the end of his driveway with microphones and cameras, he politely declined to speak. "I'm just a farmer," he told them through the fence. "I grow food. That's all." Still, the story grew. The leader of the group, the one with the rolled-up map, was arrested 2 days later at a roadside diner 50 miles away. His name was Derek Boone. Turns out he wasn't some backwoods extremist. He'd been a history professor at a small college until he was fired for pushing racist theories in class. After that, he'd fallen into online hate forums, gathered followers who felt displaced or forgotten, and built the Heritage Guard out of bitterness and bad history. Investigators found emails where he bragged about testing the resolve of black landowners, calling them soft targets. The other 4 were picked up within the week. Most were young, early 20s, drawn in by Boone's speeches about white heritage and lost glory. One had a record for vandalism. Another had dropped out of high school and been living in his uncle's garage. They weren't masterminds, just lost boys handed a dangerous story and told it made them powerful. At the county jail during questioning, one of them broke down. Said Boone had told them the farmer was just an old man living on stolen land, that he'd run as soon as they showed up. They never expected him to stand his ground, let alone disarm them with words and presence. "He looked at us like we were children throwing tantrums," the kid said, voice shaking. And maybe we were. The legal process moved slowly, as it always does. Charges included trespassing, criminal threats, conspiracy, and hate-motivated intimidation. The district attorney called it a clear case of targeted harassment based on race and property ownership. Civil rights lawyers offered to help build a stronger case, linking Boone to known hate groups in neighboring states. Federal investigators even took an interest. Domestic terrorism units were watching groups like the Heritage Guard more closely these days. But through it all, he stayed on his land doing what he always did. He harvested his sweet corn, canned tomatoes, repaired the chicken coop roof that had been leaking since spring. Neighbors started stopping by, not to gawk, but to help. A retired mechanic fixed his tractor for free. A young couple from the next farm over brought bags of mulch and spent a Saturday helping him rebuild the garden beds the gang had trampled. No one made a big deal of it. They just showed up, worked quietly, and left with a jar of his peach preserves or a basket of green beans. One afternoon, a group of veterans, mostly older men, some in wheelchairs, others walking with canes, pulled up in a pickup truck. They didn't say much, just nodded, handed him a folded American flag from brothers who remember what service really means, and stayed to help clear brush along the creek. They ate lunch on the porch, talking about fishing, grandkids, the price of diesel. No mention of the incident. But their presence said everything. He appreciated it. Not the attention, but the solidarity. The quiet understanding that some battles aren't fought with guns, but with dignity. Then came the town hall. The county organized it at the community center, a low brick building with folding chairs and a coffee pot that never quite stayed full. They'd held meetings there about road repairs, school budgets, drought relief. But this one was different. The room was packed. Black families, white families, church leaders, farmers, teachers, even a few curious teenagers, and him sitting in the back, hat in hand, hoping no one would call on him. But they did. After the sheriff gave a brief update on the arrests, and a civil rights advocate spoke about land theft and racial intimidation in rural America, the moderator turned to the back of the room. "We're honored to have someone here who lived this," she said gently. "Would you be willing to share a few words?" A hush fell. All eyes turned. He hesitated. He wasn't a speaker. Never had been. But he thought of his grandfather, walking into that courthouse with his head high while people whispered behind his back. He thought of the young men who'd been misled, thinking hate was strength. And he thought of the land, his peace, his promise. So he stood. He didn't walk to the front, just spoke from where he was, voice low but clear. "I didn't ask for any of this," he began. "I just wanted to farm. To live quiet, to honor the work my family put into this soil." He paused, looked around the room. Not at faces, but at the space between them, where understanding might grow. "I served this country overseas. I saw what happens when people let fear and lies divide them. I came home hoping to leave that behind. But hate doesn't care about borders. It follows you even to a quiet farm in Georgia." He took a breath. What those men did, it wasn't about history. It was about power, about making someone feel small so they'd give up what they'd earned. But land like mine, it's not just dirt. It's memory. It's sacrifice. It's the right to say, "I belong here." He looked down at his hands, rough, stained with soil, steady. "I didn't fight them because I wanted to win a fight. I stood because walking away would have meant letting a lie become truth. And I won't do that. Not for me. Not for my grandfather. Not for the next farmer who just wants to grow food in peace." He sat down. The room was silent for a long moment. Then slowly, people began to clap. Not loud, not showy, but deep and real. Like they'd heard something true. After the meeting, folks didn't swarm him. They just nodded as they passed. Some said, "Thank you." Others just held his gaze a second longer, like they were seeing him, not as a symbol, but as a neighbor. In the weeks that followed, something shifted in the county. Not overnight, not perfectly, but real. The local historical society started a project to document Black land ownership since Reconstruction. Deeds, photos, oral histories. The high school history teacher invited him to speak to her class. He declined but sent a letter. And a group of farmers, black and white, formed a rural safety network, checking on each other's properties, sharing information, standing together if trouble came. Even the sheriff's office changed. They assigned a community liaison to rural areas, held regular meetings, and made it clear. Threats based on race or property would be treated seriously, not brushed off as local drama. As for Boone and his group, their case dragged through court, but the damage to their cause was done. Online, their website was taken down. Their followers scattered. Without Boone's voice, the Heritage Guard crumbled like dry clay. One former member even reached out, sent a letter through his lawyer apologizing, saying he'd been blinded by anger and lies. He didn't respond. Not because he couldn't forgive, but because he didn't need to. His peace wasn't tied to their regret. Life on the farm returned to its rhythm. The okra kept growing. The goats kept escaping. The chickens laid eggs like nothing had happened. But he noticed small things. Kids on school buses waved when they passed. The feed store owner saved him the best seed packets. And one Sunday, A white family from 3 farms over came by with a pie and asked if they could walk the creek trail with their kids. "We want them to see good land," the father said. "And good people," he said yes. That evening, as he sat on the porch watching fireflies rise over the bean field, he felt it. Not triumph, but something quieter. Something deeper. He hadn't just defended his home. He'd reminded a whole community what it meant to stand together. Not with weapons, not with noise, but with truth, work, and the simple courage to stay. And that, he thought, was worth more than any piece of land. It was legacy. Winter came soft that year. No hard freezes. Just cool mornings and golden afternoons that stretched long into the evening. The fields lay fallow, covered in a blanket of ryegrass he'd planted to protect the soil. Smoke curled from the chimney of the old farmhouse, and the goats dozed in the sun near the barn, bellies full of hay. Life had settled back into its rhythm, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Not the silence of being watched, but the calm of being known. The legal mess with the Heritage Guard had finally wound down. Boone took a plea deal, 6 months in county jail, 2 years probation, and a lifetime ban from owning firearms or organizing hate groups. The younger ones got community service and mandatory counseling. None of them ever came back. The red truck was sold for scrap. The website vanished. And just like that, the storm passed, leaving behind clearer air. But the real change wasn't in courtrooms or headlines. It was in the everyday. People started showing up, not with cameras or questions, but with hands ready to help. A retired schoolteacher brought seed catalogs and helped him plan next year's crop rotation. A group of high school students, part of an agricultural club, asked if they could do a project on sustainable farming using his land as a case study. He said yes, and spent afternoons walking the rows with them, showing how to test soil, when to plant cover crops, why compost mattered more than chemicals. They listened like it was wisdom, not just work. Then came the veterans, not just local ones this time, but men and women from across the state, former soldiers, sailors, Marines who'd heard his story and wanted to learn how to farm. Many were struggling after service, some with injuries, others with minds still tangled from what they'd seen overseas. They didn't want pity, they wanted purpose, and he had plenty to share. He cleared a corner of the south field, built a small greenhouse from reclaimed wood, and started a program he called Roots After Service. No fancy name. No grant money at first, just dirt, seeds, and time. He taught them how to plant lettuce in raised beds, how to care for chickens, how to listen to the land instead of fighting it. One former medic, who hadn't slept through the night in years, told him that for the first time since coming home, he felt calm, like the earth was holding me instead of the other way around. He didn't call it therapy. He called it farming. But he knew what it was. Meanwhile, the Historical Society finished their project. They published a small booklet, Land and Legacy, Black Farmers in Our County Since 1865 PO, with photos, deeds, and stories. His grandfather's name was in it along with dozens of others. At the launch event, held in the same community center where he'd spoken months before, the county commissioner stood up and said something simple but powerful. Ownership isn't theft. It's history, and we honor it by protecting it. After the event, an elderly white woman approached him. She'd lived in the county her whole life, her family owning land just 3 miles down the road. "My great-grandfather sold your grandfather that land," she said, voice trembling slightly. "I found his journal last year. He wrote that your grandfather was the most honest man he'd ever met, that he paid every penny on time with respect." She handed him a photocopy of the page. He read it slowly, then folded it carefully and put it in his shirt pocket. "Thank you," he said. That was all, but it meant everything. Spring arrived early. The peach trees bloomed pink and white, and the first peas pushed through the soil. He worked alongside the veterans, showing them how to train tomato vines, how to spot aphids before they spread. One of them, a quiet woman who'd served on a Navy ship, started a small herb garden near the porch. "For tea," she said, and for remembering that good things grow slow. News crews stopped coming. The internet moved on to the next story. But in the county, his farm became something else. Not a symbol of conflict, but a place of return. A place where broken things could heal, quietly, in the sun. Then came Veterans Day. The county decided to do something different that year. Instead of the usual parade and speeches at the courthouse, they held a small ceremony at his farm. Just 50 people, veterans, neighbors, a few local officials, and some kids from the agricultural club. There was no fanfare, no podium. Just chairs set in a circle under the old oak tree, the one his grandfather had planted as a sapling. The sheriff spoke first, not about crime or justice, but about courage, the kind that doesn't need a uniform to show up. Then the high school teacher read a letter from her students about what they'd learned from working the land. Finally, the county commissioner stepped forward, holding a simple wooden plaque. It wasn't shiny, no gold lettering, just carved oak sanded smooth with words burned into the grain, for steadfast stewardship of land, legacy, and peace. He accepted it without a word, just a nod. But his eyes glistened, not from pride, but from the weight of being seen. Not as a threat, not as a victim, but as a man who'd done what was right, quietly, every day. After the ceremony, people stayed. Shared food from coolers and paper plates. Kids chased fireflies, even though it was still daylight. They didn't care. The veterans sat together, laughing about old mess hall stories. And he walked among them, refilling coffee, passing around jars of last summer's blackberry jam, feeling something he hadn't in years. Belonging. Later that night, after everyone had gone and the dishes were washed, he sat alone on the porch. The plaque leaned against the wall beside his rocking chair. He didn't hang it up. Not yet, maybe never, but he liked having it nearby. He looked out over the fields, dark now, but alive with the hum of crickets and the rustle of wind through dry corn stalks. In his mind, he saw his grandfather walking these same rows, hands in the dirt, head high despite the stairs. He saw his younger self boarding a plane to a war zone, wondering if he'd ever find peace. And he saw the faces of the young veterans who'd found their way here, looking for something real to hold on to. He'd thought farming was his escape, but it turned out to be his calling, not because it was easy, but because it was honest. The land didn't care about your past. It only asked, did you show up? Did you care for it? Did you leave it better than you found it? He had, and now others would too. A few weeks later, he got a letter from the state agricultural department. They wanted to feature his Roots After Service program in a statewide initiative for veteran farmers. There'd be funding, training, maybe even a small grant to expand the greenhouse. He read it twice, then set it aside. He wasn't in it for the money, but if it helped more folks find their footing, he'd say yes. That afternoon, he walked the full perimeter of his land, like he always did at season's end. He stopped at the north corner, placed a hand on the old oak. Its bark was rough, its branches wide and strong. It had weathered storms, droughts, even lightning once. But it was still here, still growing, he whispered, just loud enough for the wind to carry it. We still here, Granddaddy, and in the quiet that followed, he felt it. The deep, unshakable truth that no lie, no gang, no twisted story could ever erase. This land was his. Not because he'd fought for it that night on the porch, but because his family had loved it, worked it, and believed in it long before he was born. And he would do the same for as long as he could. As the sun dipped below the tree line, painting the sky in soft oranges and purples, he turned back toward the house. Smoke curled from the chimney. A light glowed in the kitchen window. Inside, a pot of stew simmered on the stove, and the radio played a low country tune. Home. Not just a place. A promise kept.